Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters from quiltingismytherapy.com, and welcome to the Help How Do I Quilt It Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along. Throughout this video series, I'm showing you some of my favorite quilting designs for different quilt blocks. And in this video, we're going to learn some designs for the log cabin blocks. In the last video, I showed you some designs for log cabin quilt blocks, but those quilt blocks are so versatile and used in so many different ways that I had to make another video with even more design ideas. And just like last week, the designs that we're going to learn are meant to work on a range of different log cabin blocks. I'll show you how to quilt them on a sewing machine and a long arm, and tell you how you can get some free quilting diagrams. So let's get to it. In this first design, we're going to use diagonal lines to draw your attention to a certain point on your log cabin block. It looks very similar to the halvesies design we learned in the last video, with a slight difference. So this is the point that all my lines are going to come back to, this outer corner of my log cabin. From this point, I'm going to quilt a line that goes to the opposite corner of that block. Once that's done, I'm going to travel along the seam until I get to my next point, and I'm heading towards the corner of that next row. From that point, I'm going to quilt back to my original starting point. Unlike that dot-to-dot design that we learned in the last video, I'm disregarding all the strips of fabric. I'm just quilting my lines so they go from this corner to my opposite corners. From this point, I'm going to go right down the diagonal to the opposite side. Travel along the edge of that center block to the next corner. Now that I have one half of my block quilted, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And back to that original starting point. Since all the lines go to this one point, it's going to really draw attention to that area, so be sure to use it in some of your favorite blocks, especially blocks that surround a focal point of the quilt, since that'll help draw your eye to that area. In the other half of my log cabin block, I'm going to just fill in with an all-over design. It's very similar to what we saw in the last video. Quilting a curvy kind of design is just a nice contrast to the straight lines on the other side, and it fills in this fabric with a beautiful texture. And of course, you can do whatever design you want in this area. It could be loops, it could be paisleys, it could be any kind of design that you feel comfortable quilting. Depending on the look you're going for, if I really want the straight lines to stand out on the other side of the block, I'll quilt the filler on this side a little bit more densely. It will really smash down that area and make the unquilted space between the diagonal lines stand out a little bit more. I'm using this black thread so that you can really see what I'm doing, but if you're actually using this design on a quilt, I would definitely pick a thread color that matches the fabric. That's going to give you the beautiful texture without showing off every little bump and bobble. And when I'm done, I have those beautiful straight lines that really draw your eye to the corner of the block. Who knew that quilting a design could be as easy as connecting the dots? If your log cabin block is made up of strips that are about 2 inches wide, instead of looking at the whole block for the design, you can look to the individual pieces and use some of your favorite sashing designs. You can pick 2 different designs and alternate between them, or quilt each section differently. It's kind of like a choose-your-own quilting adventure. In this section, I'm going to show you the Boxy design for sashing, as well as a pointy wishbone. Both of these designs add a geometric kind of pointy look to your quilting and are perfect for those 2-inch strips. First, let's do that Boxy design. I'm going to start by quilting a square that fills in my strip. And once I get ready to run into my previously quilted line, I'm going to begin echoing inside of that square until I reach the center. And once I get to the point where I don't have any room left, I'm going to quilt directly over the previously quilted lines until I'm outside of the box, and I'm going to repeat, quilting another box shape and then echoing my way to the inside. And I'm going to continue doing that, quilting my squares, echoing to the inside, and then continuing on. Now, as I'm quilting these boxes, I'm not worried about the number of echo lines on the inside. Instead, I'm trying to keep the spacing between the lines consistent. It's not the size of the box that will determine the density, it's that spacing between the lines. Even though I'm quilting a lot of straight lines, I'm not going to use a ruler because it takes longer to do so. I'm just trying to keep it somewhat straight and moving on. This geometric design looks great in strips or sashings that are about 2 to 4 inches, although you could use it in wider strips as well. Just quilt your initial square a little bit bigger and add the echo lines until you reach the inside. If you're dealing with a block that has a lot of smaller strips, you can quilt this design over multiple smaller strips to make it a little bit easier to quilt. And I'm going to keep on going until I fill in that whole strip. I love this on more graphic style quilts, maybe quilts that are a little bit more masculine, or where I want a little bit more of an angular geometric look to the quilting. As you're quilting this design, try not to rotate the quilt as you're echoing those boxes. Not only will the quilting design come together a little bit faster, it will help you get comfortable with quilting in all different directions. You might notice on my boxy squares that my corners tend to be a little rounded. That's because I quilt a little on the fast side. If you want those nice sharp corners, you can hesitate for just a second in that corner. Quilting this design on a long arm is just the same. I'm still not going to use rulers for those straight-ish lines. Since the straight lines are kind of short, they're a little bit easier to freehand, and plus I kind of like how it gives it a wonky, organic look. But you could use a ruler if you want for all the lines or maybe just some of them. Really, it's up to you. Find what makes you comfortable. Try not to overthink this design. The squares don't have to be perfectly straight or even the same size. Just get it close and move on. For the corners, I'll quilt the initial square so it fills in that whole corner area, then I'll echo inside and continue on in the next direction. Honestly, it's so fun and quick to quilt this design. Like I said before, quilting doesn't have to be difficult to be impactful. So whether you quilt this design on a long arm or a sewing machine, it's a great way to add a boxy, geometric look to your log cabin blocks. Another design option for the strips of your log cabin could be this pointy wishbone. It goes together the same way as a wishbone design with a more pointy look. Let me show you what that looks like. From one side of my sashing, I'm going to quilt a diagonal line towards the other side, stopping about 1/4 inch or so away from the edge. Then I'm going to echo that edge back towards myself for about 1 inch or so, and then quilt another diagonal line that goes towards the opposite side. Echo back, and then another diagonal line. And I'm going to keep doing that, quilting the diagonal lines, echoing the edge, and continuing on. Now I love to use this design in strips that are about 2 to 4 inches wide. I probably wouldn't use it in strips much wider than that since it can be trickier to quilt in those bigger areas. Now as you're quilting your pointy wishbone, your triangle shapes might be bigger, your diagonal lines might look different. It really doesn't matter. Just quilt the shape and continue on. Turning the corner with this design might seem kind of tricky, but it's actually not too hard. I'm just going to keep on quilting until I hit that inner corner of my strip. From that point, I'm going to quilt my diagonal line as normal. I'm still going to echo the side. But this time, my diagonal line is going to go to the opposite edge of my block, where I'll echo the side and continue on in the next direction. Now, this design is meant to be kind of fun and funky, so if it doesn't fit that corner perfect, it's totally fine. Just wrap it around the corner and keep on going. Then, all that's left to do is to continue quilting the pointy wishbones until you reach the end of your area. This design comes together the same way on a long arm. I'm still quilting those diagonal lines, echoing the side, and working my way back. Once I reach the corner, I'm going to quilt the diagonal line to the opposite side and continue quilting the design in the new direction. Using sashing designs in your log cabin blocks is an easy way to make your quilting designs more versatile. This last design is by far the most elegant looking design, but it takes a little bit longer to come together. Feather motifs and log cabin blocks are meant to be together, kind of like peanut butter and jelly, like Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. Some things just belong. But fitting those round petals into the jagged, irregular area of a log cabin can be daunting. Try not to let it scare you. It's easier than it looks. Before we start, we need to identify the area that we're going to be filling in with our feather. Is it a part of a log cabin block, or is it an area that is made when several blocks come together? Once you have that area defined, then you can start quilting your feather motif. I'm going to quilt this feather so that it fills in half of the log cabin block. Start by quilting a line that arcs out and back and does the same on the other side, kind of like a figure 8. From there, I'm going to quilt a wavy line towards one side, ending in a teardrop. Then I'm going to start quilting my petals along one side of the line, returning back to the center. Quilting those half heart shapes so that they merge into the spine. Try to extend them out to the edge to fill in the area. If they don't reach, it's fine. We'll come back later and handle any gaps with some echoing. Once I've made it to the center, I'm going to echo the spine back to the top and quilt more petals on the other side. Again, we're just trying to fill in the area as much as possible, so it's okay if the petals are different sizes. Now once one side of my feather is finished, I'm going to repeat on the other side, quilting a wavy line that ends in a teardrop, and then adding petals to each side. Now, if this seems like a lot to keep track of, don't worry. You can check out those free quilting diagrams that I've put together so that you can trace over the design until it clicks. I'm going to echo the spine and quilt more petals on the other side. And once I've quilted the motif, I'll fill in any larger gaps with echoing. Now, this is definitely going to be best for larger blocks with enough room for the feather motif, so I'm not going to try to put it in very tiny areas. And this design goes together the same way, no matter if you're quilting on a long arm or a sewing machine. When you're finished, you'll have a beautiful, elegant feather that highlights half of that log cabin block. If the idea of quilting that feather motif in a larger area seems scary, you can try quilting it in a more defined area. In this example, we can quilt the feather so that it fills in the strips of the block. I'm going to quilt my figure 8, just like I did on the last one, except I'm going to center it on the corner of one of the strips. And from there, I'm going to use the seam as the spine of my feather and quilt the petals so that they extend from there. Quilting one that goes out, traveling, and coming back. Repeating that until I reach the edge of the area. Then I'll travel back along that seam, back to the center, so I can do the same on the other side, filling in that whole area. Having those strips as a guide gives me a clear area to fill in my feathers, and you just might find it easier to quilt it that way. If you think you can't quilt feathers or that seems too hard, I promise you that it isn't. I have a whole video series that shows you how to quilt feathers, so be sure to check that out. Once I filled in one side with that feather, I'm going to do the same on the other side. Now, this is perfect for blocks that are symmetrical with strips of the same width. It'd be really hard to quilt a feather if one strip is much skinnier than the other. And I'm definitely going to use this in blocks that I want to show off. Whether you quilt your feather so that it flows over the area or quilt a more restrained type of feather, it's going to really give your quilting a custom look. In the previous examples, we've used that feather design to fill in a portion of one log cabin block. But you can also use it in bigger areas, especially in areas where multiple blocks come together. In this example, I've quilted that feather so that it fits in the green area where those two blocks come together. Even though the design is bigger and it looks like it might be a little bit more scary, I actually just used the same steps to create it. Quilted that spine in the area, quilted my petals so they extended out as far as possible, and then used echoing and a filler to handle any gaps that were left behind. It's just really cool to see that you can take the same steps and apply them to different areas and get a totally different looking design. Wow, that is a lot of designs for log cabin quilt blocks. I hope you found at least one or two that you want to use on your quilts. Now it's your turn. If you're quilting along with me on the custom panel I designed for the challenge, go ahead and fill in the blocks highlighted in red with the designs of your choice. You can use the designs that I've showed you in this video or come up with your own design variations. And as always, I've put together some free quilting diagrams, so be sure to click the link in the description box to check those out. And I'll be back soon with the next video in the Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along, where we'll talk about design ideas for curved blocks. Until then, everyone, happy quilting.